after years working with married people, right? What is the biggest misconception married people have about marriage?
About marriage, man. This is because I've seen it. Just context, doing premarital and doing marriage counseling. I think it's that expectations, not being really explicit, almost unromantic about expectations. I think you have a misconception that it's not supposed to be hard, that you always have work, that ultimately the person that you're with is always changing, and so are you. And so it's just like, that's not the person I married. Yeah, that's not the person you married. The person you married is changing, and they're always going to be changing. Biggest misconception is that your spouse is here to make you happy, right? You hear so many people now talking about like, well, I'm no longer happy. Well, I'm like, it's hard enough for people to want to even stay alive single with the suicide rates, or even be happy single. If you could put that in a bottle, you'll be trillionaire. So if it's hard enough for you to figure out how to be happy on your own, what makes you think that a marriage is going to make you happy? And we've become addicted to, or we've worshipped the idol of happiness. And so I think more common, what I think is more relevant to people listening now, is the idea of like happiness is ultimately the litmus test about whether or not you should stay married or not be married or not be married, whether or not your marriage is going well or not going well. I think that's one of the biggest killers and sabotage of marriage, is the happiness piece, right? That it's not supposed to be this hard or that. And then lastly, I think difficulty is the seasons. Don't get to determine seasons, right? Michelle Obama talked about this, and people went up in an uproar. She was just like, I went 10 years, I didn't like him, that's real.
Real talk though, bro.
That's real. It's just like, I think we're more committed to circumstance than our commitments. And I think it's at the end of the day, you're like,
Say that again, because I think that went over people.
We're more committed to circumstances than our commitments. We're no longer committed to our commitments. Everything is fair weather. How do I feel today? How is the stock chart today? I'll see whether or not. Commitment is decided like it's a settled matter. We understand that there's certain friends that we knew, like in my life, I'm just kind of like, that's not my people. It's a settled matter. You're my guy, we're gonna rock. You don't understand how much that actually frees you up. But to our point, we believe that, I must have married the wrong person, or this is like, no. You have to be committed to the person, not so much the circumstances that'll come. Going in is gonna change. I think the last thing I think is that we lose, and I'm a part of this, even as someone on the journey myself, is that we forget, whether you're of faith, that there are people writing about someone. The Gospels, whether, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, there were people who are in someone's life who are with him long enough to write about him. I've done so many funerals, man, where you see the funerals where you could tell whether somebody really invested in relationships, because the people that were going up there giving remarks, they give remarks like they knew them. And so after the end of the funeral, you feel like you know that person because you got all the pictures. You forget that one of the biggest gifts of staying with someone is that they're the best biographer known to man. They have seen you, and they're one of the witnesses that actually tells the world that I was here, right? How do you know that Martin Luther King was here? How do you know that Jesus was here? Because people wrote about it. There are people close enough. And what's one thing that we give up when we give up on our relationships is that you actually now have a more chopped record of your life, because there was somebody who got the most consistent view than more any other people. They see you in vulnerable places. There's nothing that will bring something out of you like a relationship that no other relationship will bring out of you, right? Brothers know, sisters know, right? And so because of that, you're like, they get to see the real you. They get to see you as a parent. They get to see you in your fears. They get to see you in your worries, your concerns. They get to see you when you're lowering a parent down into that ground. They get to see you when you're lifting the baby from that stirrup. They get to, wow. They get this, and so now you have somebody who has a record. And I think it's almost like hard drive, man. It's just like, man, like when somebody throws a hard drive away. That's like when you throw a relationship away and you're starting all over again. And so to your point, I think the big misconception is the happiness, that you're committed, that your commitment is a settled matter, it's covenantal. And that's something that you need to do.
My mother said the realest thing, the only person that really knows you is your spouse. And it's true, though, because you, as you grow, you're a different person than what your parents knew, but your spouse really knows you. And what I noticed that personally is that what helped me, obviously marriage is rough, especially in the beginning, right? But what I noticed that, or what I was able to do that helped tremendously is that we're taught to put so much effort and work into everything else but our relationships with people. So it's like your career, working out, whatever. And when I actually put effort into my marriage, it got so much better. You get what I'm saying? But it's like a foreign concept in a sense. Like we're not taught to put any effort in our relationships.
Not taught at all. And I think, again, your number one school for that was supposed to be a relationship, right? And so many people, they're going out, they're surgeons, but then go to medical school. So similarly, they're going into school of marriage without seeing that, because ultimately that's taught by what you saw, right? To say, oh, that's his work. Oh, this is, right? But if you've only seen people give up, right, it's harder. Even if you have them together, it's hard, right? And so I think that's one piece of it. Two, you're talking even about in marriage. You have that same mindset clearly going into marriage. And so people feel like, oh no, as though somehow you don't have to prepare. You have to prepare to be a husband. You have to prepare to be a wife. It's so counter that in our culture where, again, it was just like, oh, everything goes. I don't want to be limited to a box of expectations of who I'm supposed to be and what I'm supposed to do. But I'm like, there's some basic things about learning how to be generous, learning how to serve someone else. Marriage is service, it's sacrifice. If you've not at least been taught at least how to do that in general, on top of the nuance of what it looks like to do that for another man and a woman, that's one thing I think in particular, in our community, this is something I don't think it's a controversial thing. I think most of us would come from an environment where 80% of us, especially, we're coming from an environment where we learn how to mediate ourselves amongst a woman in authority, because there's often a single mother there. So now, whether you're a man or a woman, you are going into the world or going into relationships under that dynamic of how to mediate with another woman of authority, right? But now, for many people don't know, men and women are different. That seemed very controversial to say. I think it's a divine endowment, our disposition, whether you take socialization or just what is innate in us. Put that together. So it's like you're speaking a different language. So now I've been taught, I was upset with my parents. They were like, you didn't teach me Efik Ibibio from Nigerian, you know what I'm saying? But you were taught language of woman. But now you're going in an environment where you're building a relationship with a man, and you're like, I don't know his language, and I'm mad because I'm trying to force this program that's not working, and I'm not understanding, and now we're not speaking to each other. So again, that's just one element of lack of preparation. We're going in not thinking that we have to prepare. I don't have to do anything. There's no finishing school. There's no wife school. There's no husband school. That was supposed to be a marriage, seeing your parents. Often you're going into marriage, you think that you're starting with a completely clear slate. But typically in moments of vulnerability, you go from what you know. You go from your instinct. And so now you're bringing to say, man, I desire to be married. I desire to be a good husband. I desire to be a good wife. But I've been trained unconsciously to be a single mother. And I don't see these things as single mother thoughts. I see this as, this makes sense to me, because this is my world. I remember growing up, I didn't have my grandparents. I didn't know what I didn't know, because I didn't know what I was missing. My norm was my norm. Now when I'm seeing my nephew, I'm like, oh, that's what that looks like. That's what I was missing. So now you're going in thinking your world and what you know and what your thinking is towards marriage is everything. But you don't realize that you've been prepared and trained to be someone who is not necessarily prepared for marriage, to be a wife, to be a spouse, just not be a partner. You're trained to be that. So to your point, because what are they pulling from? At least in an imperfect union, you still see that they at least had a program that allowed them to be together. But now you're coming in, at least it's almost like in business, I like to give these analogies because it helps people anchor it. They used to say, like, if it's not on a deck, it doesn't exist. Really, like, don't tell me about your idea. Put the idea down. Let me react to something, right? Similarly, you may make up or you may be upset about, oh, yo, your business failed. You did something like, but if you saw something, somebody put something down, and you could just iterate from there. So at least I have a model coming in about what works. What are you coming in with, right? And ultimately, you have to both, marriage is like, I'm taking a model, and hopefully I'm learning what I'm going to take, what I'm not going to take. I'm also trying to be healthy. And then I actually have to learn how to be a good wife or husband. Then I got to learn my spouse, right? Because I can't just apply that. If I was married to somebody else, it requires something different. And so all of that together is why it's difficult. On top of that, to your point, man, our society, and we're part of it, is a very self-centered society. And the core of marriage is giving up of self for someone else. And now if you're coming into marriage, you know, you've been taught that a husband is there essentially to pay bills and just fulfill your lifestyle desires or provide for you and serve you. And then a wife is just there to just cook for you and that's it, right? You know what I mean? Or that she's just there to fulfill your desire sexually, as opposed to I'm there to serve. There's a larger mission for me. This was faith. It's like, it has to be bigger than us. Last thing I'll say was like, you hear often sometimes people push back against the idea of staying for kids. One of the reasons why I'm just like, I remember my parents sometimes getting up, they'd be like, we're not leaving, we'll never. And they used to say like, you know, we're not, you know, my mom used to be like, I'm not anybody else gonna raise y'all. No other woman's coming near y'all, right? But part of it was just like, that's part of actually, that's noble. That you're also doing something for something beyond you. So people are like, oh, I don't like the idea that you're doing it for the kids. There's some seasons where that's the only thing that's holding it together. There's some seasons where there's one spouse, their faith is what's holding it together because you're weak in that season. There's nothing unnoble. It's actually quite fact noble to say, even beyond my own interests and how I personally feel, I've committed myself to something that impacts other people. And so there may be seasons where, you know what, the only thing that's holding us together is them, right? But I have faith at the end of the day, because it's an act of service, that this thing will come around, right? And ultimately, the point is that your hope is that you want the next generation to be better off, right? To say, okay, well, we've done it. That was our sacrifice, but at least they're not going into the world less likely to want to commit with a less view of what sacrifice is necessary. We may not think it's perfect, but we at least give them a realistic view of what relationships are. So they're actually going in with eyes wide open. They're actually more well-equipped than other people because they don't have this Lulu social media view that we're going to be happy all the time. Why did they get mad at Michelle Obama so much when she said that? And she's a married woman, like together with someone who's a president, and she's a married woman, and she's happy, and she's cool. They got mad at her. How could you ask people to do that? Well, now if I am a husband and wife, we have difficulty and we work through it. I'm like, it may have not been perfect, it may have not been that, but we've given them a healthy view.